Welcome back. Moments ago, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a lawsuit backed by President Trump to invalidate millions of votes in battleground states of Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
The lawsuit was brought by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and backed by numerous Republican attorneys general, including Florida's Ashley Moody. Dozens of Republican members of Congress also supported the effort. South Florida Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart is among them. CBS4's Jim DeFede, host of Facing South Florida, joins us now to discuss this. So, Jim, let's just start. Your reaction to this news?
It's not surprising. This was a specious lawsuit from the outset. Almost every legal expert I saw or read made it clear that this had no chance of being a success, that this is just more of a PR stunt by the Texas Attorney General, who is hoping to curry favor with President Trump because the Texas Attorney General has many of his own problems, including both state investigations and federal investigations and allegations of corruption surrounding him. So this is just his attempt to ingratiate himself with the president. But just to take a step back for a second, this is a complete repudiation of Donald Trump's mantra for the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks. You know, this was not just a close call. This was a complete dismissal of the lawsuit. There were 2 dissenting opinions, and let's just be careful about even using the phrase dissenting opinions. Justices Alito and Justice Thomas, what they did was they said they thought that, well, maybe Texas could have standing to bring a case like this, and they would have liked to see it proceed, but they offered no opinion as to whether or not they thought that, and they specifically said they didn't want anybody to interpret their dissents as meaning that they were supportive of the allegations made in the lawsuit, because the allegations were ridiculous. I mean, it was just a complete hodgepodge, kitchen sink lawsuit of every terrible allegation and lie that the Trump administration has put forth that had already been rejected by some 50 court cases around the country previously. So it's not a surprise, but it is completely, I wish I could say that this was the end of it, but it's not. There will still be some more up Donald Trump's sleeve to try to basically keep himself in power until the last possible minute.
Jim, if this was a PR stunt, and you're right, there was information on there that was easily verifiable. It was incorrect information that you didn't have to be a lawyer to figure that out. Why were so many mainstream Republicans, including Miami Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, willing to hitch their wagon on this specious lawsuit?
Well, and that's the sad part of this. I mean, I think by now we understand who Donald Trump is, the nature of his character, the fact that he will never concede. He cannot accept the fact that he lost, but it's the other Republicans. This shows you just how completely the Republican Party is in fear of and controlled by Donald Trump. And that's the sad news of this. The fact that Mario Diaz-Balart would attach himself to this lawsuit. Now, he issued a statement today saying that, having given an oath to the Constitution, he felt that there were important constitutional issues which should be conveyed here. That's almost laughable. What this lawsuit attempted to do, what the president has done for the last 5 weeks, is to try to undermine the basic tenet of American democracy, which is the peaceful transfer of power, which is the notion that we have elections. We don't have courts deciding who is president, and this is the very nature of this. So the fact that Ashley Moody, the Attorney General of Florida, the fact that many members of Congress, Matt Gaetz, others throughout the state, including Mario Diaz-Balart, supported, more than half, I think the total number ended up being 126 members of the Republican caucus, so well more than half of the Republican caucus. And the sad thing is, here's where the crust of it is. Their cowardice is now exposed. All they needed to do was to stand up in unison. Donald Trump has already pledged that he will go to war against Murkowski, the senator in Alaska, pledging to primary her. He's going to war against the governor of Ohio, DeWine, because he wasn't happy with his comments. He's going to war with the governor of Georgia, the governor of Arizona. He's going to go after Mitt Romney. How many people can he go after at once? If the Republican Party had stood up like Mark Marco Rubio, like Rick Scott, others throughout the country had stood up and said, we had an election, he lost, we need to move on for the good of the nation, then there is nothing that Donald Trump could have possibly have done. But instead, they cowered behind him and did his bidding, and it's to their shame.
Jim, as always, we appreciate your insight this evening. Certainly a lot to unpack here.
Okay, Jim, thanks a lot. Well,